In 2007, African warships docked in Somalia. Soldiers backed by the African Union arrived in full force to combat Al-Shabaab, a terror outfit threatening the stability of the region. For the next 10 years, the African Union mission in Somalia would make big strides in pushing Al-Shabaab further from the vital port cities. Today, the world wants to see Somalia's security in the hands of the Somalis, and AMISOM soldiers are required to oversee a smooth handover to the Somali military and police in the next 3 years. But behind the scenes of these new plans, concerns are mounting over the preparedness of the fragile nation, which is tackling a mutating Al-Shabaab with renewed warfare tactics.
They committed to continue and join
At the United Nations compound in Mogadishu, one of the most important meetings of the year is underway.
Support to build the capacity.
A high-level security conference to lay the foundation for the next big move for the Somali government.
Participants welcomed the concerted efforts of the federal government of Somalia to tackle the lead role for security in Somalia.
The United Nations Security Council has resolved that the African Union forces working to restore stability in Somalia should work out a plan that will see them hand over the security of the country to the Somalis by 2020.
So the national security architecture is very, very important because it's basically setting in place the mechanism whereby Somalia can sort out its own army, police, but also justice system.
It is true that 1,000 troops are leaving the country by the end of the year, but it is also true that 20,000 so will remain. We shall see what can compensate for this 1,000 for us to remain effective.
This compensation that Ambassador Madiera speaks of is a plan to deploy an additional 500 police officers to replace the 1,000 soldiers who will leave Somalia by December 2017. AMISOM police officers are already working with the Somalis to see this transition through.
Weak people.
At this police station in Mogadishu city, Kenyan policeman Inspector Aiden Hassan and his Ghanaian counterpart Sergeant Gladys Dunebon are taking local officers through a human rights session. The police stations in the city like this one we visited are now fully run by the Somali police force. They have the basic infrastructure and a handful of officers. But AMISOM's presence is still evident.
You should not torture him, and you should provide him a clean place, clean food, clean water.
The local police here appear to have a fairly good grasp of the basics of policing. Their trainers, however, have some concerns.
They need about 3-4 years. They have a long way to go in terms of, because of what they've gone through and their progress. So the women, the children, and even the vulnerable, we need to educate them more.
They need to be assisted every time. They need to be given more time to train and advise the SPF police.
Inspector Aiden and Sergeant Gladys think that the drawdown is premature. It's a sentiment shared by many AMISOM officers who are currently mentoring the Somali police. The officers who patrol the waters are the least convinced that the Somalis are ready to take over. The sea patrols conducted every day at the Mogadishu coastline are still done by the Ugandan troops, and at the moment, there are no Somali officers shadowing them. So as the AMISOM troops patrol on land, the marine troops are also in the sea patrolling the coastline and ensuring that Mogadishu can trade safely. So you can imagine, as AMISOM prepares to ship out, how much work the Somali military will have to do to be able to conduct the kind of patrols that AMISOM troops have been doing at sea here in Mogadishu. Although the US is said to be training an elite Somali force, it is still unclear whether they are ready to take over the marine patrols.
I think the honest answer is, with some notable exceptions, no, it's not ready. There are some exceptions. I mean, if you look at Benadir and Mogadishu, security has already been transitioned to security to Somali forces in a number of places, and it's working. It's also worked in a couple of places, around the country. And don't forget that Puntland, there's no AMISOM, and they have fairly good security. So this isn't a dream. I mean, this can be made to happen. But it is not the case that the Somali security forces are yet ready.
At dusk, we join AMISOM police officers to observe their regular night patrol in the city of Mogadishu. Different police contingents pitch camp at major street intersections, and alongside Somali police officers, they conduct searches on vehicles to secure the city streets overnight.
The main challenge I feel is because of the long time of the crisis, it has truly affected them morally. That trauma of not being educated is the main challenge they are having.
We meet some of the Somali police officers patrolling the streets, but they're unwilling to speak on camera. With our persistence, one of them agrees to be interviewed, but on condition that we protect his identity. What is the attitude of the Somali population towards police, like towards you, for instance?
No, it's really good. It's really good. Everyone is working together. Yeah.
But how comes you don't want your face shown? What is your fear?
Well, it's not peaceful yet, so yeah, you can't just show your face. You don't even, closest relative, probably one of them, you know what I mean? So you have to be cautious.
This anonymous officer is one of the many Somali diasporans who want to witness the stability of Somalia in their lifetime. For him, it is a dream worth risking his life for.
I've worked with AMISOM for 2 years, and we worked. I mean, we cleaned up the streets. But now I have to work with the Somalis, try to rehabilitate them, because I came from a peaceful country. And I think it's helping them, because the way I talk to civilians, or, they see that and they do the same as me. So they see that there is no threat coming from civilians, and they don't have to fear civilians. And if they work with civilians, maybe civilians will come and work with them if they're nice enough.
But what motivates you personally to come out on the street and do this work?
I want for the government and for civilians to get along. That's all I'm trying to do, is work. I work everywhere. I work on my time off even. Right now I don't have work. It's my time out. I just dressed up to come and help, because there's less workers, less police officers tonight in this intersection. That's it.
We meet Commissioner Christine Olalo, who heads the AMISOM police team in Mogadishu. She paints a clearer picture on why her team is jittery about the drawdown.
We are training as AMISOM, but in terms of resources, for them to be effective, we want to see resources in place. We want to see police station, so that when I train you, I should be able to send you to the next police station and see your work. They need to be resourced. They need guns. They need the handcuffs. They need the basics that you can start off with, which I'm seeing is still really lacking. still lacking. We are telling them, when you are to take a statement, this is how you do it, but do they have stationery? When you are arresting a person, this is how you should arrest. You should handcuffs like this. Do they have the handcuffs?
Our conversation with Commissioner Olalo reveals even more devil in the details. Based on a head count by AMISOM, Somalia has 7,699 federal police officers and 1,060 state police officers, manning a population of 10 million people. President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo knows that the numbers expose their weaknesses. So as part of the new security architecture discussed by stakeholders, he needs to recruit 32,000 more police officers. But there's only one problem.
You must recruit knowing that you will pay. You don't just recruit people when you don't have a budget on how you are going to pay them, when you don't have resources where you are going to get uniforms from, you know. So that is very important. Otherwise, you will recruit and then what else? They go to Shabaab?
What the national security architecture is saying is that the security forces, whether they are army or police, need to be 4 A's. They need to be acceptable to the whole population. And that means there's got to be an agreement as to how they're recruited, how the officers are trained, a good mix from around the country, and so on. They have got to be able, so that means they've got to be properly led, trained, equipped, have barracks, have a career structure, you know, be paid on time. They've got to be affordable. There's no point creating security forces that the country cannot afford to pay for. And that's a tricky one, because right now Somalia has very limited income.
African forces and Somali National Army are really committed to defeating the terrorist group, but they lack the enablers for them to do their job and finish as quickly as possible. So number one is for Somali government receiving the enablers required for us to complete the mission.
At the moment, most of the money comes from international partners. But over time, the idea is that as the Somali economy strengthens, as the government's ability to raise revenues, either domestically or through international borrowing, then the share paid for by Somalia will go up.
The money question is increasingly becoming a major headache for the Somali federal government. While international partners contribute $170 million for Somali troops, Somalia is providing only $45 million annually. And now, things just got a little more complicated. Corruption claims are threatening Somalia's security partnership with international donors. The United States has suspended food and fuel aid to Somalia's armed forces owing to evidence of graft in how the money is handled. According to Reuters, documents seen between the US and the Somali government show that the Somali army is unable to feed, pay, or arm soldiers despite receiving millions of dollars from the Americans each year. Reuters reports that the documents reveal disturbing details of Somali soldiers left without food, with no weapons, and without any form of communication. The Somali Prime Minister has also acknowledged that a decision was reached to suspend the funding as they work to clean their soldiers' payroll, currently riddled with ghost workers. If the Somali government is losing this crucial funding to its armed forces, can international partners be convinced to fund the much-needed upscaling of the Somali police force?
When we got out there, you can find policemen are there, but they are deployed under a tree. And it is called a police station. When they arrest a suspect, the suspect is, they dig a hole and put a suspect in the hole.
The Prime Minister was very clear on Monday that he wants the contribution of Somalia to its own forces to go up and to reduce dependency. But my point earlier was it can't go up until he is able to collect more taxes, more revenue from customs, but also able to borrow money like Kenya can do, or Ethiopia just did a $4.5 billion loan from the World Bank, right? Somalia can't because it doesn't have a normal relationship. So he's working to normalize the relationship with the IFI so he can borrow money.
In 2013, a third of Somalia's total revenue came from donor funding. The country's domestic revenue is not enough to guarantee vital public services to the citizens. And this is the biggest problem for President Farmajo and his administration. 90% of the total revenue is currently spent on administrative and security sectors. Only 10% goes to economic and social services. The fact that Al-Shabaab is still present in many parts of Somalia complicates the situation even further. The group's aggressive funding tactics through forced taxation, road tolls, illegal charcoal trade, and heavy levies on sugar smuggled into Kenya has provided a lifeline for the militants. The African Union peacekeeping troops have been under scrutiny for enabling Al-Shabaab's financial activities. A United Nations report released in November 2017 claimed that the Kenyan Defense Forces assigned to AMISOM in Kismayo are failing to enforce a ban on Al-Shabaab's charcoal exports. The UN says that Al-Shabaab is able to raise $10 million every year from the illegal charcoal trade.
They should come up with a very clean accusation to AMISOM that AMISOM has violated human rights. We are committed to zero tolerance to such kind of things, and we have come out very clean. Many times what is happening is that these people take hearsays as being facts. When we ask them to prove, they have no evidence. That's one thing. Now, yes, some charcoal might find its way out, but not all the charcoal goes out as it used to. We have reduced it significantly.
Even with these allegations of corruption and human rights abuses by AMISOM, international partners like the United States are still funding AMISOM troops.
It's a concern of the African Union, it's a concern of the regional states, it's a concern of the Somali government. In order for there to be success in countering Al-Shabaab, there has to be a very balanced strategy, not just a military strategy, but it has to be about winning hearts and minds and working, again, at the community level. If there's corruption in the Somali security service, there's corruption in AMISOM, if there are human rights abuses in AMISOM, those undermine fundamentally the strategy of our regional partners in Africa. So we are working with the United Nations in some cases bilaterally, and obviously with the AU in the forefront, working to have teams, military justice teams, other assistance to ensure that any allegations of human rights abuse can be followed upon properly, and that the justice systems apply their work.
This is insurgency. This is terrorism. These individuals, to survive, they need to be in the middle of the population. Our strategy is to isolate them from the population, deny them shelter amongst the population. And the only way we can do that is to come closer to the people, understand what their problems are, if they have any grievance, what those grievances are, and try to address them. Make them understand that we are there for them. We are facing difficulties, yes, but we are partners with them. If they come to understand, that will go a long way in addressing the problem we have. Proving to them that Al-Shabaab is pursuing a corrupt, degraded, retrograde ideology. We have to convince them. For that, we need everybody.
Despite the insecurity, despite the ongoing insurgency, Somalia is making progress. Now, this progress is not going to be sustained unless a number of things happen. First of all, that the Somalis can agree among themselves politically how they are going to work together. And what we are seeing is the growing pains of a country trying to answer that question. What is the relative power of the federal government versus the federal member states? You know, if there are resources, what percentage goes to the federal government? What percentage goes to the federal member states?
The African forces in Somalia are drawing down their military presence and working on a transition to hand Somalia's security to the Somali armed forces.
We have no colonialist mentality. We have no hegemonic spirit. We are a liberating force. We are African Union.
But an inexperienced Somali force and the lack of adequate funding is threatening the success of this drawdown ordered by the United Nations Security Council. Somalia's president must now look for economic stability, even as corruption in his administration threatens his relationship with international allies. And then there's the question nobody is answering. Are all the involved African nations ready for the transition? Will Kenya withdraw her troops from Somalia? 1,000 AMISOM soldiers will leave Somalia by end of 2017, but around 20,000 more will remain. Uganda's 6,700 troops are in charge of Sector 1, where Mogadishu is situated. 3,664 soldiers from the Kenyan Defense Forces are in Sector 2 and are in charge of most of Kenya's eastern border with Somalia. Ethiopia's 4,395 troops control Sector 3, while 1,000 additional Ethiopians are in charge of Sector 6, just a few kilometers from Kismayo, which is under the Kenyans. Djibouti's 960 troops are in Sector 4, while Burundi's 5,432 troops man Sector 5. AMISOM is required to withdraw all these troops by 2020 if the Somali security forces are ready to take over. However, Somalia's army and the National Police Force appear shaky and would need more time and investment before they can fully take charge. This is leaving many international partners worried. The U.S. State Department has agreed to share their perspective with us. We sit down with top officials in Washington, D.C. to find out what their biggest concern is.
Really is some urgency, I think, to AMISOM as a whole, putting as much pressure on Al-Shabaab as possible to push them out of the remaining areas that they hold and destroy them as a force as we know it. Then after that, Somali national forces and police can go after what's left of them. So that's the general strategy, but of course it's taking longer to develop the Somali national forces, far longer than I think anyone had hoped would be the case. So we still need probably a couple more years to do that.
Yeah, well, Al-Shabaab remains a very tenacious adversary. They receive support internally, and they also have other means to be able to raise financing. We are seeking to support those efforts to counter both the financing, but also acquisition of resources, and of course their efforts to increase their ranks. We're also at specific places on the ground, Kismayo, near Mogadishu, other tactical locations.
Even though AMISOM has been successful in pushing Al-Shabaab militants away from crucial port cities and vital routes, Al-Shabaab is still present in most of these areas. When the group launched the largest IED attack on the 14th of October 2017, killing 512 civilians, America responded aggressively. The U.S. has since launched sustained airstrikes in November and December 2017, killing hundreds of Al-Shabaab militants, according to the U.S. Africa Command. The feeling in Washington, however, is that AMISOM has been holding back.
Certain strategic pause that it seems AMISOM is at now. We really need them to take the offensive again. So I wouldn't single out any particular troop contributing country. It's really a need the entire force to be able to resume the offensive and put pressure against Al-Shabaab and finish them off once and for all.
What you need to know is that this is an asymmetric warfare. Asymmetric warfare, insurgency, means that they implement the kind of guerrilla warfare. They don't confront you in your terms. They confront you on their terms. They wait until when you are distracted, and then they strike. They have everything to destroy. Everything, literally, everybody and everything. And you, as a state, you have everything to protect.
Even though the Somali police force is learning from AMISOM, the AU force needs the Somalis now more than ever. And that's because of Al-Shabaab's change in combat style. The group has intensified targeted assassinations, kidnappings, and the deadly improvised explosive device.
Al-Shabaab is not looking at them as you.
Lieutenant Colonel Godfrey Isingoma leads the Ugandan engineering team in Sector 1. What is their strategy, their main strategy?
The strategy is a complex attack to our FOBs using a very strong vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. When it goes off, everybody in the FOB is paralyzed, then they come in and knock out the living ones.
That's exactly how Al-Shabaab attacked an AMISOM base in Janale, 90 kilometers from Mogadishu. The militants rammed a car full of explosive against the Ugandan base and then stormed in, killing dozens of soldiers. And what's the main challenge for AMISOM when you're trying to counter some of these attacks, especially the IED ones?
The main challenge is it continues evolving. You cannot say the IED looks like this because it depends on the designer and the target he wants to strike. Another challenge is we cannot really take control of the whole line of communication. 250 kilometers is our farthest deployment.
Al-Shabaab has launched 3 isolated attacks on AMISOM bases, killing at least 220 soldiers. The worst hit was the Kenyan forward operating base at El Ade, where more than 100 KDF soldiers were killed in the early 2016. The attack sent shockwaves in Kenya, prompting a political conversation about the prolonged presence of KDF troops in Somalia.
Despite this barbaric act by the enemies of peace, KDF will remain seized on its constitutional mandate of the protection of sovereignty and territorial integrity of our great nation, Kenya.
You cannot defend a country from within. It's like allowing a snake to come into your house and then you fight it while it's in the house. You can't do that. Nobody has ever done that. You have some engagement outside.
The El Ade attack was a major setback for Kenya's mission in Somalia. But the big challenge for the troops today is the notorious border, especially in the northern area. Officials say it's unlikely that Kenya will pull out her troops anytime soon. The strategy now is to improve the force's agility, skills, and preparedness. And Kenya has turned to one of her main allies in security and counterterrorism to assist.
Kenya gets a lot of security cooperation attention from the U.S. government in the multi-millions of dollars, every year. So some of the things that we've participated in the past year or two since we've had this partnership, we've helped build the Kenyan new horizontal engineer battalion. So that capability is directly related to helping build the border and reinforce the border along Somalia.
The Massachusetts National Guard has a partnership with the Kenyan government to help improve KDF skills. It's their only partnership in Africa.
The foreign military sales case that was presented years before and then executed with Kenya involved approximately 60 pieces of heavy equipment and then training with the Kenyans to make them competent on the equipment and competent on certain exercises. So we also have an engineer battalion in Massachusetts. And in that battalion we have a horizontal engineer company. So we worked with U.S. Army Africa Command, and the embassy And what we decided to do together was that the Mass National Guard would do a collective training with the Kenyans.
And then they just get out.
At Camp Edwards in Cape Cod, Intelligence Officer Captain Aaron Charbonneau briefs us on the cross-collaborative training they have had with the Kenyan Defense Force.
So we've been to the School of Military Intelligence at Embakasi Barracks, training the Kenyan Defense Forces and the Kenyan Air Force on collection management. A lot of it's centered around the intelligence mission and the new platforms the KDF has brought online with the support of the United States, the Scan Eagle, the Cessna 208, and trying to help them get to where bringing good, solid combat capabilities.
Having received 6 Huey-2 helicopters worth 10.9 billion shillings from the US and a 1 billion shilling Scan Eagle drone, KDF is set to expand its knowledge in the skies.
We have a pretty robust training plan going forward for next year. And
what does it involve? What does the training involve?
The training involves everything from integrating what I believe is going to be the AT-802 air tractor. So the Kenyan Air Forces should be bringing that online. It's an air-to-ground attack aircraft. It will have rockets. It will have laser-guided bombs and guns. It will also have an ISR capability because it actually has a camera on the front of it. So it will help the pilot distinguish what are good targets, what are bad targets, and that's really what our job is going over there, is applying a lot of the lessons learned that we've done in the Air Force over the past 10 years, and a lot of other irregular warfare type situations, both in Afghanistan and Iraq.
I don't know if you remember about this attack that happened, and a number of
at
KDF...
the forward operating base?
Exactly.
Yes.
It was at El Ade?
Yes.
And we lost very many soldiers.
Yes.
Do you think it could have been avoided, and what happened? What was the missing link that made them so vulnerable?
So I really can't speak to maybe a lot of the vulnerabilities. I think base defense prioritization is probably a significant component of that. Good communications with commanders back in Kenya about and having a good, so I'll put it this way, having good situational awareness of the environment around the forward operating bases may have been lacking at the time, but that's what we're training on. That's what we're training to improve. I think there's full recognition on the KDF's part that there definitely needs to be there's room for improvement in those areas, either base defense, forward operating base defense, but also the command and control component, and utilizing those intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance aircraft overhead to try to identify those threats before they approach the base and before the enemy, Al-Shabaab, can be effective.
Then everybody in the vehicle screams, roll over, roll over, roll over.
Even though a majority of the trainings with KDF have been conducted in Kenya, the Massachusetts National Guard now plans to accelerate the exchange program and bring KDF officers to Camp Edward to train with more sophisticated machines, such as this simulator.
The Army has a suite of virtual trainers. The virtual trainers we use are meant to augment real live fire training, but in a resource-constrained environment. We don't have enough ammunition to support all the live fire we need to train our soldiers. We use simulators to train in lieu of live fire training events. This simulator here is called the Engagement Skills Trainer 2000. We use this to train on individual weapons qualification that's meant to supplement specifically knife fire and NBC fire or nuclear, biological, chemical type training. Load it. All right here, this the charging candle, pull back. And slam. All right.
Still at an hour and 13 minutes.
All right, ready to go. So scan your sector. Also, you use this trainer to train certain scenario-based events as collective training. So if we have a squad, platoon, or company, this would be a squad-based training event where we would get them together to synchronize their fires, to coordinate, to communicate and engage targets, to call up situational reports. This is meant to hone individual soldier type skills at the lowest level possible, and we build that foundation across the paradigm of Army unit constructs.
And then there's this MRAP simulator, which takes soldiers through combat scenarios they can face while in a mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle, or famously known as the MRAP.
You coordinate using headsets and radios because, as you can hear right now, the simulator is very loud. It's louder in combat. So you use communication sets, or you yell to each other to say, you know, driving 100 meters forward, go. Or, you know, troops in the open, fire 2 rounds, 50 cal machine gun, fire. Then they communicate and they execute those tasks in a disciplined environment. Then they stay safe the whole time.
So how many people are usually in this scenario?
So right now there's 12 just in this trailer. And then we can hook this trailer to that trailer and do a 24. So this would be like a squad. Right. Together it would be a platoon.
The main capability, what we're trying to improve with the KDF as a whole, and including the Kenyan Air Force, is them talking to one another and then communicating effectively to drop bombs and missiles on targets as quick as possible. As soon as they're found, trying to get that information to the right person at the right time, the decision maker, the officer on the ground, to employ those weapons effectively and quickly.
The U.S. is also helping to train Ugandan troops and the Somali Special Forces. But they're not the only country involved in Somalia. Turkey just opened its largest overseas military base in Somalia and is currently training Somali police officers. The European Union member states are also working in the war-torn nation. But with so many nations interested in the Horn of Africa, can these interests become a liability for Somalia?
You have to be very careful in these situations. And in a country as fragile as Somalia, you know, they run the risk of people overlapping what they're doing, or multiple people doing the same thing. In the case of providing this kind of assistance to the development of Somali national forces, this is thankfully being coordinated now through the effort launched at the May conference in London that I mentioned, where there's several different tracks that countries have agreed amongst themselves as who will be doing what. And that's an incredibly important development. In the past, it's been less coordinated, and the effect has been not what people had hoped for. So I think now there's a way ahead, and I'm optimistic, cautiously optimistic, that this is going to work better than it has in the past.
They can pose a challenge if each one of them works and operates on its own, But if we can strike a balance to create a collaborative environment in which we know clearly what each one of us is going to do and is doing, and we can look into each other, that can be a multiplier, a force multiplier. But of course, we are still to reach that.
On the second part of the special report, we recount the toll that the war against Al-Shabaab has had on Somalis and on Kenyans. The displacement of thousands of Somalis.
I did my primary school in Dadaab, high school in Garissa, and then my higher education, university level in Nairobi, where I had to get a travel document every 3 months for me to stay in Nairobi.
The hundreds of young East Africans captured under the spell of radicalization.
And the issue of radicalization, it's there. It's a community problem.
The many terror attack survivors struggling to move on, and the lessons from those who survived one of the world's worst terror attacks in history.